She was just 19, clutching her twin daughters, as the family who once called her their own cast her out in front of a silent crowd. He was a single father, with nothing left to give, except a heart that refused to look away. What happened next wasn't part of any plan, but some miracles never are. Before we begin, if stories of compassion, healing, and second chances speak to your soul, we'd be honored to have you subscribe. Every story here is crafted with heart for you. Now, let us tell you what happened the day the sun burned everything but compassion. The Arizona sun had no mercy that day. It wasn't just hot, it was the kind of heat that turned steering wheels into branding irons that made your skin prickle before you even stepped out the door. The kind that pressed down like guilt. The kind that made people short-tempered, quick to look away. That was the kind of day Calder Brooks pulled his old Ford truck into the gravel lot behind the Hartley Community Pavilion, thinking he was just there to deliver lumber for a new gazebo. He had no idea he was about to make the most important decision of his life. He parked under the only patch of shade he could find, half a juniper tree, and stepped out into the sweltering air. From the front of the building, he heard the low hum of voices louder than usual for a town council meeting. Curious, he followed the sound around the corner, wiping sweat from his brow with the sleeve of his flannel shirt. What he saw stopped him cold. A makeshift stage had been set up in the center of the lot. Folding chairs formed a semicircle around it, and nearly every seat was filled. On the platform stood a woman he recognized, Martha Hartley, widow of oil magnate Thomas Hartley, flanked by a lawyer and holding a microphone with the poise of someone used to being obeyed. But it wasn't her that Calder focused on. It was the young woman beside her. She couldn't have been older than 19. Her sundress was soaked with sweat and clinging to her thin frame. Her arms were wrapped around two small girls, twins maybe 6 years old, both with the same auburn hair and glassy, wide eyes. The girls didn't cry. They clung silently to their mother's legs like two frightened deer in the middle of a thunderstorm. And with this declaration, Martha was saying, her voice crisp and cold, "The Hartley estate formally releases any and all responsibility for Elowen Blake and her children, Junia and Mira. They are no longer beneficiaries, nor will they carry the Hartley name or receive a cent of inheritance." There was a pause, a rustle through the crowd. Some people looked down at their shoes. Others glanced at one another confused. Elowen didn't speak. She didn't cry, plead, or even flinch. Her arms simply tightened around her daughters, and she stared straight ahead, somewhere beyond the crowd, beyond the heat. Calder stood frozen. He had seen plenty in his 36 years: fire, flood, sickness, betrayal. He'd seen his wife die from postpartum complications while he held her hand and promised the ambulance was on the way. He'd seen his daughter Solange slowly lose her words, her ability to walk, to laugh, to even make eye contact, swallowed by the rare neurological prison of Rett syndrome. But something about the quiet devastation on that girl's face undid him. Martha continued, unfazed by the silence. "This is not cruelty. This is closure. We have done what decency required. The rest is up to her." That's when Calder moved. He didn't plan to. There was no grand speech forming in his head, no heroic music swelling in the background. He just couldn't bear to stay still another second. His boots thudded across the gravel, slow and deliberate. Whispers started. "That's Calder Brooks," someone muttered. "Isn't he the one with the daughter?" He didn't care. He reached the edge of the platform and looked up at Elowen. Up close, she looked even younger. Her eyes flickered to his face, wary, exhausted, but not broken. "I don't know you," he said quietly. "And I don't know what they think you did to deserve this. But no one deserves to be left like this. No child deserves to be erased." He turned to Martha. "If you're casting them out," he said, voice steady but fierce, "I'll take them in." A gasp rippled through the crowd. Someone chuckled nervously. Martha's lip curled. "And who are you?" "Mr. Brooks, to take on someone else's burdens." Calder didn't blink. "I'm someone who remembers what it felt like the day my world collapsed, and someone who swore I'd never watch another person go through it alone." Silence. Then, from the shade near the edge of the crowd, a tall woman stepped forward. Her wide-brimmed hat cast a shadow over most of her face, but her voice was unmistakably clear. "I second that," she said, "and I'll make sure they have what they need." Martha turned, startled. "Maris," the woman removed her hat. It was Maris Hartley, Martha's own daughter, long estranged, once the golden child of the Hartley dynasty. Her eyes, misted with restrained fury, met Elowen's with something like apology. "You threw away a family today," she said. "But maybe someone else just found one." Calder extended his hand to Elowen. She hesitated for a long moment. Then, with the slow, trembling grace of someone who no longer believed in rescue, but still hoped, she placed her hand in his. And the three of them, man, mother, and twin daughters, stepped down from the platform and into the fire of the Arizona sun. Not knowing they'd just walked into each other's miracle. The drive back to Calder's cabin was quiet. The girls had fallen asleep in the back seat, almost immediately curled against each other, like pups in a den. Elowen sat in the passenger seat, her hands folded neatly in her lap, though they trembled every now and then. Calder glanced at her once, just once, and saw her jaw clenched, her eyes fixed on the road ahead like she didn't dare look back. She hadn't said much, just nodded when he asked if she was okay with going to his place. She hadn't asked where it was, how far, what he did for a living. She was too spent for questions, and he respected that. Still, something about the silence between them wasn't awkward. It was sacred, like a fragile glass dome. Neither of them wanted to shatter too soon. Calder's cabin came into view, a weathered but sturdy structure, tucked among the trees, flanked by a rust-red barn and a stack of chopped firewood. He pulled up beside the porch and turned off the engine. For a few seconds, neither of them moved. "You're safe here," he said. At last, voice rough but sincere. "I mean that." Elowen blinked, her gaze finally shifting to him. "I didn't think anyone would say that again," she murmured. "Let alone a stranger." Calder reached for the door handle. Sometimes strangers are all we've got. He helped her carry the girls inside, one in each arm. Junia's small hand curled instinctively into his shirt collar as she stirred. Mira whimpered, then sighed back into sleep once she felt her mother's warmth nearby. Calder set them gently onto the old leather couch, which had become more blanket than cushion over the years. The inside of the cabin was simple, but clean wooden beams, handmade shelves, a fireplace built stone by stone with his own hands. It smelled faintly of pine and cinnamon. Calder lit a lamp and turned down the dial on the small swamp cooler. Arizona summers didn't care much for charm, but he'd figured out ways to make it livable. Elowen stood just inside the doorway, eyes scanning the room like she was afraid to touch it with her presence. "You hungry?" he asked, heading toward the kitchen. "I've got leftover stewed chicken and rice. That would be... Thank you." "You sit," he nodded to a chair. "I'll fix something up." As he ladled out the stew, Calder found his hands moving on muscle memory, but his thoughts kept drifting back to what had happened just hours ago. He hadn't planned to get involved. He didn't consider himself the kind of man who intervened in other people's affairs. After Jamie died, he'd sworn to keep his head down and focus on raising Celine. That was all. Keep things small, contained, predictable. But when he saw Elowen up there, standing with those girls as the entire town watched her get erased, he knew something in him had shifted. Or maybe something that had always been there finally rose to the surface. He placed a bowl of stew in front of her. "It's hot. Careful." Elowen smiled faintly. "You cook, Doesn't every single parent, he said with a dry chuckle. Not saying I'm good at it, but no one's died yet. She took a spoonful and closed her eyes. This is better than any dinner I've had in years. He sat across from her, arms resting on the table. You don't have to explain anything, by the way. Not tonight. Not ever, unless you want to. Her eyes glistened. I appreciate that. There was a pause, heavy but not uncomfortable. I can't offer much, Calder admitted. I've got work that takes up most of my days. And Celine, she needs a lot of care. Your daughter. He nodded. 11. Bright as a summer morning, but she doesn't speak. She has Rett syndrome. It's hard to explain. Sometimes it feels like she's in there behind her eyes watching everything, but unable to respond. Elowen's expression softened. Sounds lonely, for both of us. I think I know a little about that, she said, looking down at her stew. Junia and Mira, they don't talk much either. Not because they can't, but because they learned early on that being quiet was safer. Calder's heart pulled tight. No child should learn that. No, she agreed. But some do. They ate in silence for a while. The kind of silence that comes after truth is shared, not erased, not judged, just placed gently between two people like a candle. Eventually, Calder stood. There's an extra room upstairs. Not much, but it's got a bed and a window that doesn't leak. You and the girls can stay there as long as you need. Elowen looked up at him. Why are you doing this? I don't have a perfect answer, he said honestly. But I do know that walking away didn't feel right. Bringing you home did. He started toward the stairs, then turned back. Elowen, he added, you don't owe me anything. You don't have to earn your place here. This isn't charity. It's a second chance. For all of us. She swallowed hard. Her voice was barely a whisper. Then maybe it's the first real one I've had. Upstairs, Calder paused outside Celine's door. He opened it slowly and stepped inside. The room was dark, except for the soft glow of a nightlight in the corner. Celine sat in her bed, still awake, eyes fixed on the ceiling. He brushed a hand through her light brown hair and kissed her forehead. You're going to meet some new friends tomorrow, he whispered. And maybe, just maybe, they'll help both of us find something we didn't know we'd lost. Downstairs, Elowen tucked her daughters beneath a borrowed quilt. Junia stirred, reached up, and whispered, Are we safe? Elowen didn't hesitate. Yes, sweetheart. I think we finally are. Celine had always been a mystery no doctor could quite explain, and no therapist could fully unlock. She had spoken once soft, angelic syllables when she was 3. Then, like a curtain, slowly drawing shut, her words faded into silence. Her laughter disappeared. Her steps grew uncertain. And by the time she was 5, she was a quiet presence in every room, as still as moonlight on old wood. Calder had learned to stop asking when she'd come back. He had learned to meet her where she was in soft music, in hand squeezes and blinking games. Love had become a language of patience, not expectation. So when he saw Junia and Mira hovering near Celine's chair the next morning, he tensed, protective instinct, flickering awake like a flame near dry grass. The girls had crept in on tiptoe, barefoot, and cautious as if entering a chapel. Celine sat in her usual spot by the window, her gaze blank but steady, her small frame wrapped in a quilt that had once been Jamie's. The light caught the edges of her hair, giving her an almost porcelain glow. Junia was the first to approach. She didn't say a word. She simply knelt beside Celine, laid a flat hand gently on the girl's shoulder, and smiled, not big or forced, just present. Real. Mira sat on the floor cross-legged and pulled out 3 objects from her oversized dress pocket, a crayon stub, a smooth pebble, and a broken watch face. She placed them in a line on the floor and looked up at Celine with eyes that glimmered with quiet mischief. Calder leaned against the doorframe watching. He'd seen therapists try charts, iPads, mirrors, and dozens of flashcards. He'd watched Celine blink once, maybe twice, before turning inward again, unreachable. But now something strange was happening. Celine's fingers twitched. Her eyes moved. She was really looking at the girls. Junia whispered, "Do you like shiny things?" She held the watch face up so that it caught a sliver of sun. Then, without waiting for a response, she placed it gently in Celine's open palm. Mira grinned and added the pebble next to it. Celine blinked 3 times. Calder almost dropped his coffee. He stepped forward slowly. "Girl, Celine might not." "She doesn't have to talk," Junia said gently, not turning around. "She can hear. She can feel. And we speak quiet." "We do," Mirai added, like it was the most natural thing in the world. Calder opened his mouth, then closed it again. What could he say? They weren't wrong. And for the first time in years, Celine wasn't just reacting. She was engaging. Allowance, standing behind him now, had her hand over her mouth, eyes shimmering. "They've never done that before," she whispered. "Done what Calder asked, opened up to someone they just met. They usually hide behind me, don't talk unless pressed. But this morning, they asked where Celine's room was. Said she was sad and needed colors." Calder looked back at his daughter, still holding the tiny objects. She wasn't smiling, but something in her face had softened, like the slightest crack in a frozen pond just before spring. He didn't know what was happening, only that it felt like the start of something miraculous. Later that day, Calder was in the workshop behind the cabin shaping cedar into a new chair rail for a local client. The rhythm of the work settled him. It was where he sorted his thoughts, where he could let the past roll over him without breaking him in two. But today, his thoughts refused to settle. Aloan's quiet strength lingered. The girl's uncanny sensitivity echoed. And Celine, dear God, Celine had looked into someone's eyes. He was so lost in thought he didn't hear footsteps until a voice startled him. "You carve better when you're angry, or inspired." "I'm trying to guess which it is." Calder looked up to see Aloan leaning against the post of the doorway, arms crossed, hair tied back in a loose knot. She wore one of his flannel shirts over her sundress and looked entirely out of place and perfectly at home. "Maybe a little of both," he said. "Or maybe I'm just confused." About what he wiped his hands and sighed. "You and your girls. You're only here a day, and already she's doing things she hasn't in years. Blinking. Reaching. Looking. She's not broken," Calder Aloan said, her voice gentle but firm. "She's locked in. There's a difference." Calder looked at her, the wood shavings clinging to his boots, the sun filtering in through the slats like warm forgiveness. "I've been so afraid of hoping," he said quietly. "Hope hurts when it leaves," I know she replied. "But sometimes it circles back." They stood there a moment, not as strangers, but as people who had both lost too much, and yet somehow were still standing. That evening, Junia and Mirai drew a picture for Celine. It was simple, 3 girls holding hands under a sky full of purple stars. Calder found it taped to Celine's wall, just beneath the dream catcher Jamie had hung there when Celine was born. When he tucked his daughter into bed that night, she gripped the drawing tight in her hands. No words, no sound, just a firm grasp, and eyes that seemed to say, "Don't take this away." He didn't. He couldn't. And for the first time in what felt like forever, Calder let himself believe that maybe something was waking up again. Not just in Celine, but in him. In the weeks that followed, the house took on a rhythm that Calder hadn't experienced since Jamie was alive. It was quiet, but not empty. Peaceful, but never still. Mornings began with soft footsteps and the whisper of tiny voices, Junia humming as she spread peanut butter on toast, Mira counting out spoons and napkins with soldier-like precision. Eloan brewed tea with herbs she'd foraged from the woods behind the cabin, humming lullabies from a life that once included music and light. And Calder. He started leaving the front door open again. It was Eloan who brought that particular change. She never said anything about it. She simply started propping the screen door open after sunrise, letting the breeze run through the living room, fluttering curtains that had hung still for years. For the first time since Jamie's passing, sunlight was welcome inside. Celine noticed it first. She began turning her head toward the warmth, then her fingers reached out not for people, but for things the edge of a chair, the fringe of a rug, a discarded pencil. Little touches, little tests. Calder noticed too, though he tried not to read too much into it. Hope for him had become a muscle that ached when moved. He wanted to believe, but belief had burned him before. Still he watched, and every time Celine blinked twice at Junia's made-up story or tilted her head slightly, when Mira recited facts about clouds, something shifted inside him. One morning, while Eloan was kneading dough at the kitchen counter, Calder finally said it aloud. "She's waking up." Eloan looked over her shoulder, her hands coated in flour. "She is." "How do you know?" "Because she's not surviving anymore," she said simply. "She's connecting." There's a difference. That afternoon, Mira found an old box of wind chime pieces in the shed. Instead of asking permission, she simply began reconstructing it on the porch with the solemn focus of a watchmaker. Junia sat nearby, tying little notes to long strings, each note containing a joke, a riddle, or a sweet message. Like your eyes are strong even when your mouth is quiet. When Calder came outside, he froze. The wind chime was hung low enough that Celine from her wheelchair could reach it. Mirai handed her a smooth stick and nodded. Celine stared at the dangling shapes, copper stars, tiny bells, glass beads. The wind caught them gently, making a faint, delicate melody. Mirai leaned close and whispered, "You don't have to make noise to make music." Celine blinked once, then twice. Then with slow precision she tapped the stick against one of the bells. A soft chime filled the air. Calder's throat tightened. Eloan stepped outside just in time to hear the second bell ring. "She found her instrument," she said, wiping her hands on her apron. "We just had to build it." Later that night, Calder sat on the porch alone. The sun had dipped below the pines, painting the world in lavender and rust. He held a mug of lukewarm coffee, listening to the wind chimes sing quietly in the background. Eloan joined him, pulling her knees up to her chest in the old rocking chair Jamie once loved. "She's happy," she said, not as a question, but a fact. "She is," Calder replied. "I didn't think I'd ever see that again." They sat in silence for a while, the kind that doesn't beg to be filled. "Do you ever wonder what happens when miracles are too small to notice?" Eloan asked suddenly. Calder turned to her. "I think most of the best ones are." She smiled. "Then I guess this porch is a holy place." Calder's eyes stayed on her a moment longer than necessary. Maybe it always was. It just took the right people to come sit on it again. Inside the house, Junia and Mirai were lying on either side of Celine's bed. A flashlight illuminated their faces as they took turns reading from a picture book. Junia in dramatic tones, Mirai in a mock, deep voice for the villain. Celine's eyes followed the beam of light, her fingers twitching whenever the villain appeared. It wasn't speech, but it was response. It was play. It was trust. "Do you think she dreams?" Mirai whispered. "Of course she does," Junia replied, brushing a loose hair off Celine's forehead. "She's just waiting for the right dream to come back and find her." Celine blinked slowly. Her hand shifted. She reached for Junia's arm, and held it not tightly but intentionally. A tiny miracle. Another one. The next morning, Calder rose before dawn. He walked out into the yard barefoot, letting the cold earth sting his feet. He needed to feel something real, something grounded. He looked up at the roof where the stars were beginning to fade. Then he whispered to no one in particular, "I don't know what this is. I don't know why I get to have it, but I won't waste it." Behind him, the door creaked open. Elowen stood there, wrapped in a blanket, hair-tousled eyes still sleepy. You talking to the stars or to yourself? Maybe both. Do they answer? Calder smiled. They brought you, didn't they? She didn't reply, but her silence said more than any words could have. The woman had come twice before without being seen. Once at dawn, slipping a bundle of groceries onto the porch, wrapped in brown paper and twine. Once again, 3 nights later, leaving behind a box of children's books, neatly stacked beside the door, each spine worn with love. Elowen hadn't spoken of her, not even to Calder. She wasn't sure why. Maybe because something inside her knew the silence surrounding this mystery was sacred, or maybe because a part of her wasn't ready to confront who she thought it might be. But when she spotted the figure again standing just beyond the tree line near the edge of the property, Elowen stepped out of the kitchen without a word and followed. The morning was still cool dew glistening on the tall grass, like quiet confessions. The woman didn't run. She stood beneath a cluster of ponderosa pines, half in shadow, half in light. Elowen slowed as she approached. It had been years since they'd spoken. Longer still, since they'd last looked each other in the eye. But she knew that face. She'd never forgotten it. Maris Elowen said softly. Maris Hartley stepped fully into view. She looked older, of course. Lines at the corners of her eyes, a silver streak at her temple. But the posture was the same, proud, poised, and polished, like someone born to stand a little straighter than the world required. "You look tired," Maris said gently. But strong. Elowen crossed her arms over her chest. "You've been watching. I've been hoping." For what? That I'd crumble. Prove your family right, no. Maris shook her head, her voice steady but pained. That you'd survive, that you'd find something better than the life they tried to trap you in. Silence stretched between them taut, like fishing line on the edge of snapping. "They threw me out," Elowen said finally. "And you didn't stop them." "I tried," Maris whispered. "God, Elowen, I tried. But by the time I found out what they were planning, it was done. And when I spoke up, they threatened to cut me off too. You should have let them." "I did. Eventually." Maris reached into her bag and pulled out a worn envelope. "I left 6 months later. Changed my name on paper, kept my family's money off the radar, started a foundation no one could trace back to the Hartleys." She handed the envelope to Elowen. Inside was a check and a note in soft, slanted cursive. "This isn't penance. It's partnership. Let me help you build what they tried to break." Elowen stared at the words, then looked back up. "Why now?" she asked. Maris's voice caught. "Because I saw him step out of that crowd. Calder. The way he looked at you. Like you weren't someone to pity, you were someone to protect. It made me realize that maybe the world isn't completely broken." Elowen folded the letter and tucked it against her chest. "You didn't come just to give me this." "No," Maris admitted. "I came because I want to meet the girls. And Celine. And maybe help in person. If you'll let me." Elowen considered it. There was hesitation. Yes. Wounds didn't heal just because someone asked for forgiveness, but something else had taken root in her lately. Something Junia and Mira had unknowingly restored the ability to let light in, even through old cracks. "Come by for dinner," she said. "Tonight. They'll be making their famous chili that isn't chili. Be warned, it's mostly ketchup and courage." Maris laughed. and for the first time in years, Elowen didn't feel outnumbered. She felt seen. Back at the cabin, Calder was sitting with Celine on the porch, letting her fingers brush across the wind chime Mira had built. The bells sang softly in the breeze. Junia and Mira were playing on the floor, nearby drawing pictures of trees that whispered and animals that could talk. When Elowen returned, Calder looked up. "You okay?" he asked. She nodded. "Better than I expected to be." He sensed something in her had shifted, like a knot loosened somewhere beneath the surface. She didn't explain, and he didn't press. But that night, when Maris knocked on the door just after sunset, it was Calder who answered. He recognized her instantly, not just from the porch that day, but from the whispers in town. She was the Hartley who had vanished, the heiress who had walked away. She held a casserole dish with oven mitts still clinging to it. Well, I tried," she said sheepishly. Calder smiled, opening the door wider. "We're not picky, just hungry." The dinner was awkward at first, kids watching carefully. Calder more silent than usual. But then Mira cracked a joke, and Maris responded with one of her own. Junia launched into a story about Celine blinking twice for yes, and once for "you need ketchup." Laughter followed. Walls thinned. Elowen caught Calder's eye across the table. His expression was unreadable but not closed. Later, as Maris helped wash the dishes, she asked quietly, "Does he always carry the room that way?" Elowen nodded. He doesn't realize he does. That's the part that makes it work. That night, after the dishes were dried and the girls were tucked in, Calder found Elowen standing at the back steps, staring up at the stars. "She's not just a donor, is she?" he asked. "No. She's family." In the complicated, painful, trying to be better kind of way. He nodded. "Sounds familiar." Elowen looked at him, the moonlight catching the curve of her cheek. "You think we're building something here, Calder?" He didn't answer right away, but his voice, when it came, was steady. "I think we already are, and I think maybe we just got another builder." The cabin settled into a rhythm that felt in some unspoken way sacred. It wasn't that problems vanished, they still ran low on groceries some weeks. Celine still had days of total withdrawal, and Calder's work hours still stole too much time from the life unfolding inside his walls. But the air had changed. It no longer felt like everyone was holding their breath. It felt like someone had opened a window inside their chests. One morning, as the house stirred with the scent of cinnamon toast and pine, Calder heard something unusual, the sound of Celine's door opening on its own. He stepped out from the kitchen, expecting to see Elowen or one of the girls. But it was Celine, standing on her own, gripping the edge of the doorway with shaking hands, her legs wobbling like saplings in wind. "Elowen," he called, both panic and awe lacing his voice. She was there in a heartbeat, Mira trailing behind her barefoot. Celine took one step, then another, then fell gently into her father's arms. Tears welled instantly in Calder's eyes. Not from fear, but because she hadn't done this since she was 5. Since the last time she'd had a fever and wandered out looking for Jamie, calling for a mother who was already gone. But now, she walked towards love again. He lifted her carefully, whispering into her hair. "You found the door, baby girl." Junia, watching from the couch, whispered. "She doesn't need to talk yet, but she's screaming something." That afternoon, Elowen brought out an old chalkboard she found in the attic. It was scratched and faded, but still usable. She cleaned it off and placed it near Celine's usual spot by the window. "What are you thinking?" Calder asked, leaning against the doorway. She can't speak, and typing on screens overwhelms her, but color shapes, those are safe. Elowen handed Celine a piece of white chalk. Celine stared at it. Then slowly she drew a single line, then another. A triangle. a shaky heart. Her hand trembled, but her eyes were steady. "She's telling us something," Elowen said softly. "We just need to learn how to listen." Maris returned later that day with a gift, a specially designed communication board made for children with limited verbal expression, images of food, feelings, animals, actions. Each square could be pointed to, and some had textures to stimulate response. Mira and Junia dove in immediately, explaining every icon like seasoned instructors. "This is for happy," Mira said. "You tap it when you feel warm in your chest." "This is scared," Junia added. "Or if someone cuts your pancake wrong." Soline didn't laugh, but she touched happy after watching the girls for a while. Then again. Then looked at her father. Calder blinked hard and reached out. "You're teaching me too, sweetheart. I promise I'm listening." That evening, after the house grew quiet, Calder walked outside with Elowen. The sky was awash with indigo, the stars blinking through cottony clouds like secrets. "She walked today," he said, voice barely above a whisper. "She walked, and she told me she was happy. I've prayed for less than that." Elowen looked at him, something soft flickering in her expression. She was always capable. She just needed the right keys. You've given her that. You and the girls. We all opened the door, Elowen said gently. But she's the one who stepped through. Calder turned toward her, his eyes holding hers longer than usual. "Do you know what scares me?" She shook her head. "That this isn't real. That it's too fragile. That one wrong move, and all of this peace will disappear." "It won't," she said, her voice sure. "Because none of us are holding it alone. You built the walls. I just brought paint." He smiled, then laughed a full, deep sound that startled even him. She laughed too, and the tension in his chest loosened like a knot untied. Later, after everyone was asleep, Calder sat alone in Soline's room. She lay peacefully in bed, the communication board beside her, one hand resting on it, as if guarding it in her dreams. He whispered into the dim, "I don't know what tomorrow brings. But tonight, this is enough." She stirred slightly, then stilled. And in the silence, he swore he could hear the echo of a door unlocking. It started with the jelly beans. Not the candy itself, though. Mirai would argue they had mystical properties, but the game she invented around them. It was simple, like most profound things, are 3 jelly beans in a row, each a different color. Soline had to blink once for the one she liked best, twice for the one she disliked, and not at all for the one she found boring. The first time they played, Soline picked the yellow one, then the red again. And by the 3rd round, Mirai dramatically clutched her chest and gasped, "She's voting for cherry again." "That's betrayal." Junia immediately jumped in. "Emergency jelly bean committee meeting. Who raised this child?" Soline blinked twice, slowly, deliberately. Mireille froze. She just said, "You two did," Junia whispered. Then without fanfare, Soline did something no one expected. She smiled. Not a vague twitch, not a polite reflex. A full, wide, unmistakable smile. Elowen dropped the towel she was folding in the corner. Calder, standing in the doorway, lost grip of his mug. Mireille blinked. Did that just happen? And then, it happened again. Soline let out a short, high-pitched, breathy sound. A laugh. Raspy. Broken. Beautiful. The room exploded. Junia screamed. Mireille danced. Elowen covered her face and wept silently. Calder didn't move. He simply knelt in front of his daughter, hands shaking, eyes burning. "Soline," he whispered. "Baby girl." You laughed. Soline reached forward, not to touch, but to press her hand against his chest. Her eyes locked onto his like magnets long denied their pull. It was Calder who cracked. Years of quiet sorrow buried hopes, and low, careful expectations spilled out in one long exhale. He cupped her face gently and kissed her forehead. "You're still in there," he said. "You've been in there all along." The rest of the day felt like walking through a dream you didn't want to wake from. Everything ordinary became sacred. Celine tapping her fingers to music Mira played on her makeshift xylophone. Junia writing a note that read, "Today she smiled like the sun had hands." Elowen humming as she cooked, voice light as lace. Calder sitting with Celine on the porch, letting her lean against him in complete trust for the first time in years. It was a day no one dared define. To name it would be to reduce it. They simply let it be. That night, they decided to celebrate. Mira insisted on a victory feast. Her words not unlike a birthday party, but without the cake or the tradition. Just joy in any form they could find it. Elowen made sweet corn fritters and root vegetable stew. Junia decorated the living room with string lights Calder kept in the garage for emergencies. Mira painted Celine's fingernails bright purple and called it miracle armor. Maris arrived just before sunset, carrying a homemade peach pie and wearing an expression of wonder. She laughed, she said breathlessly, as if repeating it made it more real. "She did," Elowen replied, her eyes still red-rimmed. "Once. Just once. But she did." They ate on the floor, picnic style, with mismatched plates and too many napkins. Laughter rolled through the house, not just Celine's, but everyone's untamed, contagious, and unearned in the best way. As twilight crept across the windows, Calder stood and raised a glass of lemonade. "I don't usually make speeches," he began, "but tonight feels bigger than silence." They turned toward him. "I thought I lost her," he said. "My daughter." After Jamie passed, it was like Celine disappeared with her. I blamed myself for not being able to pull her back. I stopped hoping, stopped believing. But then, he looked at Elowen, then at Junia, then Mira, then Maris. "You walked into my life, all of you. You didn't fix her. You didn't cure her. You just saw her. And because of that, she found a way back." He paused. "And somewhere along the way, I think I did too." Junia wiped a tear with the back of her hand. Mira muttered, "You're gonna make me cry and ruin my pie." Laughter broke the moment and Calder let it. He wasn't afraid of soft things anymore. Later, after the dishes had been washed and the house had settled into its usual nighttime hush, Elowen stepped out onto the porch. She found Calder there, as always, staring at the trees as if they held answers no man had ever dared ask. "She really laughed," he said, not looking at her. "She did," Elowen whispered. "You both did." Calder turned. His face was lit by moonlight, etched with something old and something brand new. "I was afraid this would be temporary," he admitted. "That today would be a fluke. But now I'm not." "Why not?" "Because nothing about this feels borrowed. It feels built." They stood in silence for a while. Then Calder asked softly, "Do you believe in second families?" Elowen took a deep breath. "I believe in the ones we choose, and the ones brave enough to choose us back." He reached out and took her hand, not as a declaration. Not yet. But as a promise. Some things didn't need to be rushed, especially miracles. Elowen woke before dawn. It was the kind of awakening that didn't come from sound or light, but from the weight of a thought you couldn't carry anymore. She sat up in bed, slowly, careful not to wake the girls tangled in quilts beside her. The moon hung low, casting a silver wash across the wooden floor. The house for once felt entirely still. Downstairs, she brewed tea in silence, the kettle's hiss the only voice in the room. She didn't add honey. Not this morning. She moved to the table and reached for the small notebook she kept in her satchel, the one she hadn't opened since the day she was cast out. It had once been a journal, then a budget ledger, then a place for prayers she wasn't sure anyone heard. Now, it would be a place for goodbye. She flipped to a fresh page and began writing. Not fast, not frantically, but with the careful, almost reverent hand of someone putting parts of their soul into ink. Dear Calder, I never meant to stay this long. When you opened your home, I thought it was temporary, a bridge, a moment of kindness I wasn't used to, but I knew better than to rely on. But something happened here, not just to the girls, to me. You gave me space to breathe, to believe again. I hadn't realized how much of myself I had buried until I saw my daughters laugh without flinching, or until I saw Celine press her hand into mine as if it belonged there. You made me feel safe, and that's why I know I should leave. Because people like me, we learn not to overstay warmth. We learn to collect our thanks, pack our bags quietly, and leave before anyone notices the room feels lighter when we're gone. But before I go, I need you to know this. You didn't just rescue me that day. You saved the version of me I thought was already dead. She folded the note neatly and placed it in an envelope. She didn't seal it. She wasn't sure she could. As the first light crept across the pine trees outside, Elowen stepped out onto the porch, clutching the letter in one hand and her sweater in the other. The breeze was crisp, promising fall soon. Change. She sat in the old rocker, heart thudding. She didn't want to go. But fear was a hard thing to silence, even in a house full of hope. Inside, Calder was already up. Celine had stirred early, and he'd risen out of habit. She was back asleep now, curled like a question mark under the quilt Jamie had sewn during her last winter. He moved toward the kitchen for coffee and paused. The letter sat on the table, his name in Elowen's handwriting. He stared at it. He didn't open it. Instead, he turned around and walked outside, following the faint creak of the rocking chair. There she was, small in the dawn, legs tucked up under her arms, wrapped around herself like she was afraid of falling apart in front of the trees. Planning an escape, he asked, voice quiet, but steady. Elowen flinched. I wasn't going to leave without saying anything she said. I just needed to know what the words would feel like. Calder stepped onto the porch and sat beside her. I didn't read it, he said. You should. I'd rather hear it from you. She hesitated, then handed him the envelope. He turned it over in his hands, then slipped the letter out and read. His jaw tightened slightly, not with anger, but with the familiar ache of recognition. When he finished, he folded it slowly and looked at her. Elowen, he said, do you know what I remember most from the day I met you? She shook her head. You didn't ask for help, not once, even when you were standing in front of a crowd that wanted to pretend you didn't exist. You held those girls and looked straight ahead, like a lighthouse. She looked away, eyes stinging. And I knew, he continued, that if I didn't do something in that moment, I'd regret it for the rest of my life. She whispered, but what if I don't know how to stay? Then we figure it out, Calder said simply. Together. You don't owe me perfection or answers. You just have to keep showing up. Elowen nodded once, then again. Tears rolled down her cheeks before she could stop them. I'm so tired of being temporary. Calder reached for her hand. Then be permanent. Here. With us. She leaned into him slowly, cautiously, like someone who had touched fire too many times before. He didn't move. He let her rest her head on his shoulder, and they sat like that until the sky turned gold. Later that morning, Mira found the letter on the counter and held it up. What's this? She asked. Elowen smiled and shook her head. Something that was never meant to be sent. Can we draw on it? Then Junia called out. Calder grinned. Actually, I think that paper might be sacred. The girls looked at each other, then at their mom, then at Celine, who blinked once. For yes. And in that moment, it became clear some words weren't meant for postage. They were meant to be lived. The storm arrived just after dusk. Not one of rain, but of wind, dry and restless, the kind that rustled pine needles like whispers and carried with it the scent of dust bark and distant thunder. Calder stood on the porch, one hand on the railing, the other cradling a cup of lukewarm coffee. He'd been holding it for almost an hour and hadn't taken a sip. Behind him, the house pulsed with quiet light. He could hear Junia and Mira playing a guessing game in the living room. Celine was humming now, a series of soft, tuneless syllables she repeated, while running her fingers over the images on her communication board. Marius was helping Elowen in the kitchen, rolling out dough, and laughing gently over some flour-related mishap. The house felt full, not crowded. Full. And it scared Calder more than it should have, because he knew what it meant to lose fullness. He knew what it felt like when a home turned quiet overnight, and the more he let himself lean into this new warmth, the more terrified he became of how quickly it could vanish. The screen door creaked open. Elowen stepped out, arms crossed against the chill, her hair tied loosely at the nape of her neck. She wore one of his denim work shirts again, oversized sleeves rolled somehow, both accidental and intimate. "You've been quiet," she said. "I'm always quiet." "Not like this." He didn't respond. She walked to the edge of the porch, standing beside him. For a while, they just watched the trees sway. "I used to think love was supposed to feel safe," Elowen said eventually. "But now, I think it's supposed to feel honest. And that kind of honesty isn't always easy." Calder let out a long breath. "Do you ever get afraid of things being too good all the time?" "I feel like I'm standing in the middle of something beautiful," he admitted, "and I keep waiting for the wind to take it away." Elowen looked at him, eyes steady. Maybe it's not the winds to take anymore. He turned toward her. "I've made a lot of promises I couldn't keep, Elowen. To myself, to Celine, to Jamie. You've kept more than you think." He studied her for a long moment. The porch light carved soft lines along her face. Tired, yes, but alive in a way he hadn't seen when she first arrived. There was color in her cheeks again, light in her voice, a steadiness in her gaze. "I don't want this to be temporary," he said. "It doesn't have to be. I want to choose this, not just because it's good, but because it's right." She swallowed. "Are you asking me something?" He reached into his pocket. From it, he pulled 2 small rings, carved from cedar sanded, smooth warm from his touch. They weren't fancy, weren't expensive, but they were made from the same wood he'd used to build Celine's crib, the porch swing, and now this life. "I made them for the girls," he said, voice thick, "as a promise they can hold, not a legal one, just one they can touch." Elowen took the rings in trembling hands. They were etched with initials J and M, on the inside a single word carved faintly. "Home." He reached for her hand, then paused. "I didn't want to give you a speech. I didn't want to rush something sacred. But I want you to know. I choose you, Elowen. Not as a rescue, not as a favor. As a partner, as someone I want to build with." Tears filled her eyes. "I've never been chosen before," she whispered. "You've always been worth choosing." Inside, Mira peeked through the curtain. "Junia," she hissed. "They're doing something mushy." "What kind of mushy?" "Like ring mushy." Junia clutched her chest. "I knew it." The chili worked. Marius, sitting at the table with Celine, chuckled. "Chili, it's our love spell," Mira whispered. Ilawan made it on Tuesday. That's when Dad, sorry, Calder started humming again. And humming is always step one. Celine tapped the happy icon on her board 3 times. Mara smiled. She's voting yes. That night, after the girls had gone to bed and the house had stilled once again, Calder lay awake beside the fire. Ilawan sat across from him, wrapped in a knit blanket, her knees drawn up, a mug of tea warming her hands. No big wedding, she teased softly. I've had enough of big. I just want real. She nodded. Then we already have what we need. He watched her for a moment, then asked Will, You stay. Not just tonight, but stay. She walked to him, slowly knelt beside the armchair and rested her head against his knee. I already have. If someone had asked Calder what home meant a year ago, he might have pointed to the cabin, the roof he patched every fall, the worn porch swing Jamie once painted green, the fireplace he rebuilt, stone by stone, after the flood of 17. It was a place defined by labor and memory, by grief and survival. Now it meant something else entirely. It meant the way Celine tilted her head toward the sound of Junia's footsteps, how Mira left her bedtime socks perfectly aligned beside her sister's wheelchair, how Ilawan hummed, without realizing it, while slicing apples for pie. It meant laughter in the kitchen, and drawings taped to the fridge, mismatched shoes by the door, and 5 toothbrushes in the cup instead of 2. It meant mess. It meant motion. It meant life. In the months that followed Calder and Ilawan's quiet promise on the porch, the house evolved from a haven into a shared world. Celine began responding to more symbols on her board, mostly feelings and food, with the occasional pointed protest if Mira tried to sneak broccoli into dinner again. She still didn't speak, but her presence had grown louder, fuller, more confident, and when she laughed, now truly laughed, it came in soft bursts like music Calder hadn't realized he was still waiting to hear. Junia and Mira turned the back shed into an imagination station outfitted with old blankets, cardboard tubes, and glitter Ilawan swore had magical staying power. They built towers, created mythical creatures, and ran afternoon workshops for neighborhood kids who began to drift over after school, like birds to a feeder. One child, a boy with a stutter and oversized glasses, told Ilawan, I like it here. No one finishes my sentences. She patted his shoulder and smiled. That's because everyone's too busy listening. Ilawan, for her part, had started a small in-home business, Whisper and Wild, selling handmade sensory tools for children with communication differences. Textured pillows, musical touchboards, watercolor emotion cards. Word spread quickly, first in the county, then online. She never marketed it as therapy. She simply called it a way to speak without noise. Maris offered to invest, but Ilawan insisted it stay local. This house was built from kindness, she said. That's the currency I want to trade in. Calder worked fewer hours now. The woodworking shop downtown had offered him a more flexible schedule after seeing a feature in the local paper, Single Father Turns Grief into Sanctuary for Kids Who Don't Speak. He didn't like attention, but he didn't mind the headline. Each night he came home to find a new drawing on his workbench, Celine's latest masterpiece. They weren't detailed, but they were bold trees, with arms, stars, with names, houses with big red hearts in the windows. One evening he held one up. What's this one mean? Celine blinked twice, then pressed 3 buttons on her board, safe warm together. He swallowed hard and hung it on the wall. One Saturday, while the air smelled of leaves and wood smoke, Calder gathered everyone on the porch. He'd built a new swing sturdy enough for 5. He sat in the middle arms around Ilawan and Celine. Mira sprawled across his lap. Junia sat cross-legged at his feet. I used to think a family was something you inherited, he said. Now I know it's something you earn. One kindness at a time. You earned us fast, Junia said. Pretty sure you bargained us in a jelly bean game, Mira added. Solene tapped funny sister's love. Alawan laughed and leaned into Calder's shoulder. Do you remember the first thing I said to you? She asked. He thought back. Not exactly. She smiled. I said I didn't think anyone would say the word safe to me again. And now she kissed his cheek. Now I say it to myself every morning. That night, after the girls were asleep and the fire had gone to embers, Calder sat in the armchair carving a small box from cherry wood. It was delicate, rounded at the edges, and engraved with a simple word on top, Grace. He didn't make it for sale. He didn't plan to give it away. He just wanted something physical to hold the miracle that had unfolded in front of him, not a flash of lightning, not a dramatic rescue, just the slow, steady reawakening of 5 people who had nearly given up. The next morning, Mira found it on the mantel. Who's this for? She asked. Calder looked at her, then around the room. At Adloan pouring coffee, Solene drawing at the table, Junia humming a made-up song. He smiled. For all of us, he said. To remind us how we got here. It was the first snowfall of the season. Not the kind that snarled roads or turned fences brittle, but a soft, drifting hush that blanketed the world like a whispered blessing. The cabin, now a living thing, with laughter in its bones, seemed to breathe with it. Calder stood at the window mug in hand, watching the girls press their palms against the frosty glass. Junia had built a tiny snow person on the porch railing. Mira had named it Douglas. Solene, bundled in a knit blanket, tapped her fingers gently against her communication board. She'd picked 3 icons that morning, Snow Family Happy. Calder tapped the window once in response. Alawan appeared beside him, sliding her arm through his. She was radiant in the way only peace can make a woman shine. Not from makeup or jewelry, but from the steadiness of someone who knows she belongs. You always get quiet when it snows, she said. It reminds me of the first year. Without Jamie, he replied. Solene didn't move from the window for hours. She just stared out silent. I thought maybe she was trying to follow her mother somewhere I couldn't go. Alawan's grip on his arm tightened gently, and now Calder looked at Solene. Now she's still at the window, but this time she's home. They hadn't planned a ceremony, but it didn't feel right not to mark the moment. The adoption had gone through quietly with no fanfare, just a judge's signature, a kind smile from the county clerk, and a notary who said, "This is the best part of my job." But that night, Calder made a fire hung paper lanterns from the ceiling and brought out an old suitcase from the attic. It had once held baby clothes and letters Jamie never got to read. Now, it would hold something new. He laid out 5 blank cards on the table. We've all been calling each other by names we didn't choose, he said, glancing at Alawan, then at the girls. But tonight, I think we each get to choose one. Mira grinned. Can I be Captain Marshmallow? You can write that down, Alawan said diplomatically. Junia scratched Junia Brooks in loopy handwriting and showed it off like a badge. Mira followed with Mira the Brave, then giggled and crossed it out, replacing it with Mira Brooks, followed by a drawing of a dragon. Then it was Solene's turn. She looked at the card for a long time. No one rushed her. Finally, she reached for the pen. She didn't write her name. She tapped her communication board 4 icons in this order: girl, home, love, mom. Then she picked up the pen, gripped it awkwardly, and wrote one word across the card, slow and careful. Mama. She handed the card not to Calder, but to Alawan. The room fell completely still. Alawan covered her mouth, the card trembling in her hands. Her shoulders shook as tears streamed down her cheeks. Calder stepped forward, eyes full. She chose you. Elowen dropped to her knees in front of Celine, cupped her face, and pressed her forehead to the girl's. "I choose you too," she whispered. Forever. Later that night, after the girls had gone to bed and the lanterns cast warm circles on the walls, Calder and Elowen sat on the floorbacks against the couch watching the fire crackle. "I thought I understood love," he said. "But what we've built here, it's something deeper. Like we didn't fall into it. We grew into it." Elowen nodded, her voice quiet. "It's not a rescue story, is it?" "No," he said. "It's a resurrection." They sat in silence for a long while. Then Elowen asked, "What are we going to tell people when they ask how we met?" Calder grinned. "We'll say a single dad showed up to deliver lumber and left with a future he never saw coming." She laughed, soft and whole. "That's not a story. That's a miracle." "Exactly," he said. Then he looked at her, truly looked, and saw not the girl from that dusty platform months ago, but the woman who had built a second life from the broken pieces of a first one. "Elowen," he said, "you turned this house into something I didn't believe in anymore." "What's that?" He took her hand. A beginning. The snow continued to fall outside, blanketing everything, the way healing often does not, with sudden force, but in quiet, gentle layers. And somewhere upstairs, a child who couldn't speak was sleeping beneath a roof full of names she chose for herself. If this story touched your heart in some way, we'd love to know. Tell us in the comments, where in the world are you watching from? It's always a joy to see how far kindness can travel. And if you'd like more stories like this, stories that remind us of love, hope, and the quiet power of doing the right thing, feel free to subscribe. We're building a small corner of the internet filled with light, and you're warmly invited to be part of it. Thank you truly for spending your time with us. It means more than you know.